Good afternoon to everyone here, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Anna Stewart. I am a CNN business reporter, usually based in London, and welcome to this big discussion: how can real news media thrive again? A very hot topic, one that's very close to my heart, and I imagine all my esteemed panelists. Now, we'll run through their names once again for you. We have Pierre Louette, Group CEO of Group Les Echos. We have Stephen Dunbar-Johnson, President International of the New York Times. We have Ryan Pauley, the digital darling here. He is the Chief Revenue Officer of Vox Media. And Josh Rucci, who is a brand new title, so it is corrected from what's on yours, 24 hours old. He is Senior Vice President, Global Agency Partnerships at Dow Jones, best known, of course, for the Wall Street Journal. Right. Before we start thinking about whether news can thrive again, real news, whether it can be profitable, I think we need to tackle the issue of real news and fake news. And that's whether fake news is false news, clickbait, propaganda, or whether it's just the term that is lobbed around by people that don't frankly like the news that they're reading based on whatever political bias. But it doesn't really matter, because what we have here is just trust issues with readers. And Pierre, I'm going to start with you. Has the era of fake news changed how Les Echos, your group, approaches storytelling?
Well, first of all, it's become a major issue for all of us. I mean, we have to cope with this. I remember reading, a declaration by Hannah Arendt, who's someone who disappeared a long time ago, saying, in our days and ages, even the truth is discussed, the truth is disputed. So we've witnessed this, and we have witnessed a vast propaganda appearing and people discussing on facts. So what has changed maybe is the fact that we need to double check even more than before. I used to work for a press agency, and double, triple checking was the name of the game. So people do that more and more. And also we try to work a lot on deciphering news, putting everything in perspective, visual journalism, data. I was hearing that the previous discussion here on brands was saying that the two things required to solve and help the brands was creation and data. I think it's a bit the same for us. We need to be creative in the way we present the news, and also data-driven in order to put grounds and firm grounds on the facts that we present. So it has changed. It's the same business as before. We want to be even more ourselves, but we need to take in consideration the way that people look at news.
And Stephen, join this, because the fake news title gets lobbed at the New York Times a lot by the US president. How's that impacted business?
It's been great for business. So let me talk about this in two strands. First, let me talk about it in the context of what it means for the New York Times. If you take the Mueller report as an example, our reporting on the Mueller report, or the things that were in the Mueller report over a long period of time, were often labeled, as we were going into this, as fake news by the current administration. Not one of those things has come out to be proven to be fake news. They've all been validated by the Mueller report. So when there are certain actors that are calling trusted news media sources fake news, I think that's very damaging. However, it is clear that there's a very organized and sophisticated bunch of actors that are out there manipulating the various platforms in a highly sophisticated way that is very dangerous. So I think we need to just segment these, and it goes back to, for us, what is essential is to do high quality, deeply sourced reporting and keep investing in that. And that, we believe, is good business.
Fake news, good for business?
I agree with Stephen. It's been terrific for the brands that I represent. The Wall Street Journal is up 19% in terms of total subscriptions over the past year. We're up to 3.3 million subscribers globally. That said, that's a very small amount of what the overall population is for global decision makers. How many people in here subscribe to a Wall Street Journal? Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic.
Sorry,
well done, Anna. Thank you. There's a tremendous opportunity, and in order to capture that opportunity, you must have trust. I was taken by what the Unilever CMO, I believe, who was up here before and said, brands without trust are just products. I think news without trust are words, pictures, and video, right? And that's all it is. And we must connect with the audience and demonstrate how trustworthy that we can be. And I think we can do that through really three constructs. One is reporting down the middle, right? And even though we might be seen, my publication is an example of this, as a center-right publication, we were the ones that broke Stormy Daniels, right, against the administration. And that is an example of terrific reporting. Second, which I think is so important, and I do criticize the media for getting away from this, separating news from opinion is absolutely crucial, especially with the proliferation of platforms where the public really struggles to separate between news and opinion, right? And with that, you can still have a point of view on one side, but your news has a firewall between what is opinion and what truly is news. And then third is, and I think the third is a responsibility both for the reader and also for the news organization. We must be able to seek diverse points of view, right? And that's a responsibility that we should provide as a media owner, right? We try to do that through our opinion pages, for instance, and having one from the left, one from the right, representing a certain issue. I think also from all of us, from a consumption point of view, seeking out these diverse views is going to make us that much wiser, that much smarter, that much more understanding.
And avoiding, I guess, an echo chamber. And this is really interesting because at the moment we're seeing a real trend in all content, not just news, in tailoring, personalizing news, making sure that the reader or the viewer is getting exactly what they want. But the problem is, if you give them exactly what they want, they're not necessarily going to get that diverse opinion. Now, Ryan, I know you've got some thoughts on this. Should you force feed your readers and your viewers opinions they don't like, news they don't want?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is that there's a level of importance around how do you tell stories about the news that we believe matters, and that's like what a media company is. Ultimately, it's an editorial organization, and you make editorial decisions every single day. And there's a lot of noise about feeding audiences their vegetables, which equates sort of real news stories with a lack of audience attention. And if you go into an editorial decision with that assumption, you've already lost the game. Like you already can't, you will be unable to communicate important things that are happening around the world in a way that audiences can relate to. I think with the availability of information that is always present now, the on-ramps that we create to news stories becomes even more important. Take the Mueller report, for example, where there's news every single day. And so if you're plugged into the political game, you're probably following it every single day. But if you're not, at some point you need to take the on-ramp onto what this story is. And so that's the approach we've taken, is how do you create an explanatory journalism that lets audiences take the on-ramp onto a story without feeling like they've missed the entire story. Oftentimes, media organizations start either at the middle or the end of the story because we follow it every day. But audiences don't. And so you have to make that relationship much more accessible, and that's how you can both get different points of view into the context, but also just keep the focus on what editorial organizations believe matters.
Maybe I want to add a thing about the fake news topic. It has brought, given a new dimension to the discussion on the role of journalists, especially in this country, maybe in other countries too, but in this country it was really obvious that with the crisis of the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest, a lot of people were asking, what is exactly a journalist? What are they doing? For instance, one of the major information channels was covering the Gilets jaunes all day long, and they were the ones the more disputed, even though they were just putting a camera in front of the guys, but they were accused of being manipulators, accused of being at the service of the power or anything. So I think it brings us also to a redefinition of the role of the journalist, and also reasserting what they do. They make choices every day, many times a day. They decide this is news, this is not news. It's a real job, it's a real profession. This profession, for instance, in France, now is relatively low in the rankings of professions. It's a bit above politicians, which is okay, but that was not a fair fight actually. But it's really under a lot of other things. And so I think we need to bring it up again in order also to reestablish that certain people bring the news, and those are news and those are not fake news. and it has been given a new dimension by the social networks, obviously, we're going to mention later.
And then we come to the thorny subject of we want to be good journalists, we want to be good editors, we want to provide good reporting, but we have to make money. And it's incredibly tricky. Of course, Google and Facebook have swallowed up ad revenue. Increasingly, media organizations look for different revenue streams. And one that I'm amazed has been as successful as it has been is subscriptions, because there was a time when people said, would anyone ever pay for content that they were getting for free online? But Stephen, let's talk to you, because I know that you've had some incredibly successful figures. You had earnings out last week. I think it was digital subscriptions now make up a quarter of your overall revenue.
We have 4.5 million subscribers and 3.6 million digital subscribers. So that's now $1 billion of consumer revenue, subscription revenue. I think if you go back a little bit in 2011, we had a sort of a dawning, if you like, that to sustain a newsroom as large as the newsroom of the New York Times, which back then was about 1,300 people, it's now close to 1,600 people, that we had to change the model. The model where that was essentially the newsroom was going to be sustained through advertising wasn't going to work. And that we simply had to get people to pay for our content. And in order to do that, you have to keep investing in the quality of the content. What I said earlier, good journalism is good business. It's mutually reinforcing. And since 2011, that view has... Back then, we felt that subscription revenue, getting people to pay for our content, was going to be incredibly important. But we also believe that advertising would remain an essential pillar. Now, to many extents, it still is an essential pillar, but our view has really crystallized around how important it is to get people to pay since then, because of what's subsequently happened with the platforms. So, in this time of great ambiguity in how you run a content business, for us, our model is actually quite simple. One, keep investing in the quality of the journalism. So I just said, we now have more reporters around the world. We have a larger newsroom than we've ever had in our history. 1,600 women and men now in our newsroom. We report out of 160 countries around the world. We have 200 reporters around the world. We're maintaining bureaus in Baghdad, in Kabul, places where most of news organizations have long gotten out of. Why? Because we think that is good business. Second thing is to make sure that we understand the consumer in ways that in the analog world we never really had to think about. So be very attentive to data and understanding how readers will want to consume your content now and how they will want to going forward. And the third thing is appropriate to say in this platform here in a technology conference is an unambiguous embrace of technology. So those are...
And the Wall Street Journal, similar story, but what I'm really fascinated in is the Wall Street Journal is now a partner of Apple News Plus. Now tell us about that and why you've made this decision. Essentially, it's the bundling of subscriptions, so it's a kind of a Netflix for news, but Apple takes a huge cut of your revenue. So talk us through it.
We think this is a terrific opportunity to extend our audience and create new subscribers at the end of the day. We mentioned I don't know if this is working or not. No? Okay, hello, guys. We mentioned before we're at 3.3 million, right? This is a very small percentage of the overall global business audience, right? How do we create that type of reach? We think we can do that in a couple of ways. One is segmenting our subscriptions, tiering our subscriptions in effect between students, where we have about 450,000 right now, core, most of us in the room, right, which is over 1 million. And then we have a C-suite membership product as well, where there are a collection of global CEOs, global CMOs, global CIOs, CFOs as well, that are part of an individual network where the value add is substantial around not just the publication, but live events and so forth. Where Apple News gets so interesting is, frankly, Apple's distribution, right? And if we can start that journey early, and get them down the road of eventually subscribing to the Wall Street Journal, right? That is inherently interesting. In the meantime, the arrangement has allowed us to invest more within our newsroom. We've hired many new reporters, and the experience will also be different. So just like the experience between a core subscriber and a C-suite, as we call them, subscriber, the experience on Apple News is going to be vastly different. The content's going to be different, much more general news focused, sport, entertainment, and so forth. So we're hopeful, and so far there's not really numbers to share, but we're very encouraged by the levels of engagement that we're receiving through Apple News.
I'm going to share this like it's a karaoke now, because I think this one doesn't work. Now, thank you. If you do see subscribers leaving your Wall Street Journal and joining Apple News, will you change this? When will you find out the numbers? When will we know whether this is a success and potentially a model for the rest of us?
This has been a slightly covered story in the media, especially the trade media, so I think we will have data that will be shared over time as we get on. As we've seen so far, and one thing I did not mention before, we have not seen significant drop-off within our own subscriptions. So this idea that this could potentially be cannibalistic to our existing business has not proved true. We're very comfortable both with the engagement and also with the lack of cannibalization associated.
And Vox, which hasn't had any paywalls, hasn't had a subscriber base, has stayed away from that, is not only joining subscription and paywalls and tiers and memberships, but also joining Apple News Plus. So have you lost faith in ad revenue? What's going on?
Yeah, no, so we actually believe that this is our sort of our entryway into a consumer revenue stream. Our approach is more on a true membership standpoint, where we'll sort of add additional content, which is what Apple News Plus was for us, where we launched a new brand called The Highlight, which sort of takes a step back from the churn of news every week and gives you long-form editorial on one topic deeply. But what I think Apple News either has to get right or somebody else has to create is a platform that can both be subscription and ad-supported revenue. The zero-sum trade-off that has been assumed is, I think, a faulty one and an unnecessary one, but there is a place for premium content that can be supported via a subscription or a membership fee, but also a premium advertising experience that exists alongside the content. Because that's where I think marketers need media companies in order to build relationships with their consumers. There's no better place than to work with a Wall Street Journal or a New York Times who has an established relationship with a consumer to be able to build that trusted relationship. If you think about a marketer's access to your attention, the woman from Nielsen was talking about this. There are all of our attention is going to sources that are not ad supported. You can watch 6 hours of TV on Netflix with no ads for now. You can stream your radio on Spotify for a few bucks a month with no ads. And so the share of voice, the ability to reach consumers through a marketing message is becoming more limited. And so where do you do that? You have to do it and build relationships through media companies who have trusted relationships with audiences. And I think this zero-sum trade-off between advertising and subscriptions is one that we have to graduate out of, because right now that's where we're stuck.
And Pierre, taking that Netflix model, are we all going to end up bundled together? Is that the future? Is this where we're heading?
Well, I think basically what we found out, at least for us in the recent years, is the fact that we're competing with a huge array of subscription-based models. You know, when you sell for 10 euros here in France a subscription to a newspaper, you're competing with Netflix. And they spend 13 billion euros a year on programs. We don't. We would love to, but we don't have that kind of money, actually. So you're competing with giants, and, how many times a person is going to spend 10 euros per month to be subscribing to something? So there's going to be Apple Music, Spotify, Deezer, Netflix, and so many others. What we try to work on really is get the best lessons from them in terms of how do you display information, for instance, how do you outlay in terms of creative design, really put the information in front of people, because people get used to a very horizontal way of navigating through the programs of Netflix. It's pretty much like that, and then you can circulate, go downstairs, go upstairs. We try to do that on the new versions of our website for Les Echos, for instance, recently, which was released like 2 months ago, and it works really well. I mean, because people can relate to that. It's become a new standard of navigation in a certain extent. So we work on that. We work on data very much also because they do. They tend obviously to know what you look at, why. We work extensively and we try to get inspiration from our good American colleagues, for instance, and we visit them often to find out how do you get someone to go to the paywall, hurt the paywall, and then become a subscriber. What kind of article is it? Why did he make the decision? After how many tries, after how many failures. And this is typically something that draws on technology, but also on the kind of paper that you write. And the third thing I would say on this evolution is that we need to be creative. We need to mix short and long reads. We need to do more long reads. I really push the newsrooms to do that. And sometimes it's not so easy with a newspaper, so we do magazines at the end of the week. And also online, you can be really long. I always appreciate when I go to the information or Medium, you see it's going to take you 7 minutes or it's going to cost you 20 minutes. We're in a world in which everybody competes for attention. I was reading this incredible book recently by a guy called Bruno Patino, who's a good friend, by the way, and an expert in media here in France. He was saying that a research showed that a goldfish has an 8 seconds attention span capacity. And he was saying that we do have a 9 seconds, so we beat the goldfish, by the way, but that's how much we spend each time. Yeah, we're a good goldfish. How much we spend each time we look at our smartphones. So attention is cut, and we need, I think, to really bring also the love of a long read, a long effort, but something that you will take away a lot from. It will nourish you, and this is important for us also when it comes to working on subscriptions.
And attention needs to be earned. And this actually brings us to the next kind of topic. And actually, Ryan, you've written ad nauseam about this, and beautifully, might I add. Talk us through attention must be earned, and actually the relationship between the media and the marketers.
Yeah, so I think it's build a little bit on the point I was just making, but the quick stat is that the average user scrolls through about 300 feet worth of social media feeds every single day. Now, I'm from the US, so my American reference for that is that's the entire height of the Statue of Liberty. Every single day, 300 feet worth of feeds that you're scrolling through. Marketers, what you're trying to do from advertising is get someone to watch 3 seconds worth. If you're lucky, they'll watch 3 seconds worth of time inside of 300 feet of feed scrolling. It's impossible to build a brand. You might be able to acquire a customer, but it's impossible to build loyalty that way. You cannot break through. But when we've got somebody watching 8 minutes, 10 minutes at a time on YouTube, for instance, or reading 15 minutes worth of a long editorial article, text-based article, if you've got people engaging in comments or in real life with editorial teams, that's how you build relationships. And that's the marketers' challenges and media companies' challenges are becoming closer and closer alike. Even the new categories like the direct-to-consumer brands built their businesses off of cheaply acquiring customers on Facebook and doing it better than the big incumbents. And now they've acquired the customers, and now they need to build a brand. And so now where are they looking? The customer acquisition costs are going up on Facebook, and they come to media companies. They're coming to us, and I have 3 conversations a week with these brands about how do they take their businesses to the next level. How do they increase the lifetime value of the customers that they've acquired cheaply over here? But how do you build brand loyalty over with media companies? And that's why I get excited and why I'm optimistic about advertising going forward. But I think that's the sort of phase that we're in now.
I'll just Stephen go.
So I just think that again for me and for the New York Times, it is so important when you're asking people to pay, and the validation of getting people to pay for content and investing in content is actually the mutual, the positive circle of that is you're creating a highly engaged audience. People are paying for your content. They're spending time with your content. They value your content. And therefore, you have a very powerful case talking to advertisers about the proposition. So people may be scrolling down to the top to the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. Our model is about ensuring that we are investing in high-quality content which people want to read. And we are in a very challenged time right now. And I mean, going back, I just want to also make a comment about Apple. The New York Times is not with Apple. I suspect it might be quite successful. We made a decision not to go to Apple for a couple of reasons. One is that we want people to spend time in our ecosphere. If we're investing all this time in our journalism, we want them to spend time with us. We want to understand who they are and how they're spending that time. We don't want somebody else to be the gatekeepers to that data. But I think there's also another important reason here. The New York Times is doing quite well. The Wall Street Journal is doing quite well. Financial Times. There are a few actors that are doing quite well. Washington Post. But there are many, many actors in our business who are doing very, very badly. In this industry, in the United States, there are fewer journalists are losing their jobs faster than coal miners. The local media industry, regional media industry, is dying, if it's not already dead. So, frankly, giving a tax of 50%.
This is Apple.
Yeah, I think is morally irresponsible today.
So if they lowered that, you might be more interested.
No, I think I stay with what we said. I mean, by the way, we're going to watch and see the Apple thing, how it develops. Our principle is we're generating great content. We want people to spend time on our content, and we want to know how they're spending that time.
Moving back to advertising. Moving back to the fact that so many of your companies have their own branded content marketing businesses, you're kind of transitioning into marketers. It's a blurred line. Pierre, do you worry that readers will lose faith, trust in news agencies if they're given so much branded content? If the line blurs between being informed about the news and being sold something?
Well, I think you need to draw a very clear line between what is the editorial content and what is, brand content. At the New York Times, for instance, I think it's very clear. You have a separation, even physical. There is a studio, I think, that produces brand content that's perfectly respectable, but is very clearly distinguished from anything that comes from the journalist and from the newsroom. And so, when it comes to branding and the relationship with your user base, you need to have a clear contract. And we pay a lot of attention on that too, obviously, not to blur this line and not to mislead people into thinking that this was an article, whereas it was not. Because, I always say that we have a reputation to defend, and it's very, very long to build and very quick to lose. Anything that will happen to our brands will damage us and will hurt us very deeply. And we already have enough problems, by the way. Some of us thrive, others, have more trouble because they're not international, and they need to really find their ways on a domestic market, which is very, very restructured by the platforms, by the social media, if you want. So, clear line, not blur the frontier, and spend a lot of time on bringing quality to the readers. It's the only job we can do well, really, and using technology, by the way, and everything that is around it, but have a clearly good product, something that makes you want to spend time on it. So, be strong on your principles. That's what you have to bear in mind.
And Josh, with your brand new fancy title, Global Agency Partnerships, you must have big thoughts on this area.
Big thoughts. And going back to what Ryan was talking about before, I actually think that the focus on the reader will help address some of the shortcomings of digital advertising, right? We just named a chief analytics officer within Dow Jones, right? We are embracing data in spades, right? Both for our own subscribers and for non-subscribers, right? And being able to inculcate that within our product development and within our organization. Data is going to be gold when it comes to this. And yes, I completely agree with Pierre, and we do the same thing. We separate what is newsroom content, what is sponsored content. When we do live events, we separate what is Anna speaking versus our hiring Stephen to come speak at one of our events, right? So it's very clear to the consumer what is news versus what is sponsored. That said, what we can unlock to the advertisers are new insights about our audience and really focus on the data aspects to create excellent custom content, excellent branded content. And secondly is on the experience side, right? Because we can convene people so effectively around the world through a live event series, that is an authentic brand experience. If they can get in front of a discerning, whether it's C-suite brand, whether it's C-suite audience, whether it's a core Wall Street Journal audience, and have a live exploitation and a live conversation with their brand, of their brand with their consumer.
And that maximizes, monetizes data, but it also keeps it within the four walls.
Indeed it does.
Which keeps it safe. Now,
Absolutely.
I want to move on to something very important. It's something that Stephen actually brought up on a call before we all met today. Maybe news can be profitable, and maybe we can keep on getting subscribers, whether we get bundled up, who knows what the future is. But there is a really big threat to journalism, to real news media, and that is violence, that is hostility to the media, that is censorship. I was looking at some pretty shocking stats, actually. A report from the Committee to Protect Journalists said at least 34 journalists were killed in reprisal for their work last year, and that's nearly double the year before. Stephen, kick us off with this.
Well, 34 journalists intentionally killed last year. 5 journalists, I think, have already died this year. So there are actually 58 journalists, I think, were killed last year on the job. 34 intentionally murdered. There are 250 journalists in prison around the world right now. There are over 60 journalists missing around the world right now. Being a journalist today, and particularly being a female journalist today, is extremely dangerous in many parts of the world. Even here in the European Union, we are having journalists murdered. In Malta last year, there was a journalist murdered. So the travails of producing journalism, we talked about the business models, and we're all tackling the business models in different ways. There are the New York Times way, the Wall Street Journal way, the Vox way. There's also now the contribution model, which is an interesting model that the Guardian have just broken even. So there are different ways that we're all tackling this. But there is also another aspect out there of a lot of our future is going to be dependent on our ability to build and expose our journalism around the world. And there are a lot of regimes around the world who are intent on making that very difficult. So one of the things that we should be concerned about, I believe, is the balkanization of the internet and how political actors are treating journalism around the world. I mean, and it's frankly not helped that the leader of the free world, President Trump, is calling journalists enemies of the people. That gives validity to bad actors in many parts of the world.
I was going to ask why we're seeing more hostility and more violence. Does that feed into it, the political context in the United States and, frankly, in Europe as well?
I think these words have consequences.
Pierre, according to the World Press Freedom Index, which is part of all these reports, EU countries have also deteriorated on this front. Are you noticing more hostility towards journalists in France? In fact, I have to say the Yellow Vest protests were actually mentioned in the report.
Well, I was mentioning this previously. Journalists have been accused of many sins. You know, they're supposed to be carrying the sign and the symbols of the power. They are part of the establishment for the people on the street. Themselves do not believe this because they're not paid like the establishment usually also. So they're in sort of a crossfire. But I wanted to maybe, because we're reaching the conclusion to some extent, I wanted to and really respectfully of what you said, which is very impressive about the numbers of journalists kidnapped, killed. And when I was at Agence France Presse, it was also a matter of attention all the time. But on the brighter side, journalists and their brands can meet their public. This is what we're doing here, literally. This event has been co-founded and is co-owned by a media group. And we need, I think, to organize more of those live events, those places and those venues where people can see exhibitions, technology, business, but also newsrooms producing information live. It is very important for people to relate to those journalists. I think it will also close the gap that has been created to a certain extent between them. And this is an illustration of what we want to do: live events, shows, all of those moments in which the public, the audience gets to meet the people producing the coverage and interact with them also. We need to be more open to this interaction.
Josh, I'm sure you've got something to add here on...
Sure. We in the media have a responsibility to continue to hold power to account, right? To continue to break the Stormy Daniels stories, the Malaysia One MDB stories, aspects of the Mueller report. It's absolutely our responsibility. I think we as citizens of the world, right, and citizens of our own countries also have a responsibility. And that is to, one, defend journalism and provide some type of advocacy for awareness of exactly what Stephen's talking about. And second is to support this with subscriptions, support this with newsstand sales if you're an individual newspaper. This is a very challenging time, right? And profits will provide independence for all of our organizations to expose these things and to hold power to account. I think it's a fundamental responsibility.
Now, Ryan, you have a different take on this as well. We were speaking before. You're very concerned about social media and the hostility you see on there.
Yeah, I think the hostility that exists for journalists, not only in real life but in the digital sphere too, is very real. And the feedback loop on Twitter, on Facebook, the platforms we're sort of talk at the margins around how do you improve the trust on these platforms, and I'm just not sure that it will actually ever rectify itself. And I think there might need to be either a new platform or some of the engagement needs to move back onto media company platforms, because there's just you look at the Edelman Trust Index that comes out earlier this year, where the users' trust in social media is half that of capital M media, and the platforms are not built for healthy engagement, and so that's where I think is as big of a threat to the journalists and to the thriving sort of journalistic community at large. In addition to all of the things we've talked about already. What's
the solution there, Stephen?
Well, I do want to try not to be too gloomy about this, and so thank you for trying to be optimistic. And let me just say that I think there are lots of interesting things that are happening in the media industry now which should give us room for optimism. We're finding that, again, if you invest in high quality content, I'm going to keep persisting with that because it's essential, you can find lots of different and interesting ways to monetize it. We have a podcast now called The Daily, which was last year the most downloaded podcast in America. It is listened to over 2 million people a day on average. It is allowing us to get journalism out in a new way. It's allowing us to reach a much younger audience, much more female audience, which has been fantastic. We are just about to launch a TV show called The Weekly, which is coming out in June. It's going to be distributed on FX and Hulu. The point being that if you create high-quality content, you can find ways of monetizing across multiple platforms in multiple ways. And I think there is no substitute for that, thinking about investing in journalism.
Well, thank you very much to our panel. And the message is, read us, watch us, listen to us. Please subscribe to us and support real news media. Thank you very much.